Morning, everyone. Oh, it's recording. Pressure's on. Okay. Yeah. Sorry. Good evening. So I'm Jake on the left-hand side here, the handsome one, and this is my colleague Richard on the right here. Two of the fishery management advisors with the Angling Trust, funded by rod license money. I live in Coventry. Richard lives up in the northwest, so I sort of cover the south, and Richard the north. Tonight we're going to look at the techniques to reduce the impacts of predation by pisky birds, with sort of special sort of focus on cormorants this evening. So here's a quick overview of our role. We're here to help improve refuge for fish in times of predation, help fisheries with modern, effective, non-lethal scaring tactics, assist with individual and also area-based cormorant licenses. Also look at, through those area licenses, monitoring bird numbers and evidence in the impacts of predation. And then sort of, I suppose, the other half of our role is helping fisheries against, predation by otters, particularly still waters, and fencing and funding. And then also both of us are on the CL36 license to trap and remove otters from within fence fisheries. So today we're going to talk about these cormorants. And firstly, we're just going to have a quick look at, I suppose, the huge variety of things that can impact fish stocks, whether that's an increase in fish stocks or, as we're looking at today, predation, which is part of decreasing fish stocks, with pisky birds there at the bottom left, just part of that, of things that can happen alongside, pollution, natural mortality. But then there are other sides to that as well. And I suppose that sometimes, angling can switch off and fish can almost go missing in times of predation, and actually sometimes that could be down to behavioural changes, and actually during the daytime when cormorants are coming into feed, they're going into hiding. So what we'd always recommend is a stock assessment of that. So I suppose the first port of call would be a fisheries technical officer from the Environment Agency, but then obviously there's a number of sort of private companies that will come in and do that for you to actually look at what's going on. So cormorants, a couple of nice pictures here just to get you in the mood here. This is Blashford Lake down on the Hampshire Avon Valley, and a cormorant quite easily taken down a pike there, probably 3 or 4 pounds, struggled to take off there. Another common sight that we see, I suppose, you'll come to the gate and open the gate and you'll see a few birds taking off from maybe a still water. You'll come down, and this was a site down in Devon where a couple of cormorants had two birds had regurgitated some of these fish as because they couldn't take off, and they regurgitated these sort of skimmers up to take off and fly away. So I suppose a little bit of background, and just to understand what we're talking about the great cormorant, Phalacrocorax carbo, and I think it's key to understand the two subspecies of this species of bird. So you have the Phalacrocorax carbo, which is our native seabird, which gradually from the 80s has taken up residence inland, so started to feed and then sort of breed inland still waters and rivers. And also the Carbo sinensis bird, which is the European freshwater cormorant. To the sort of naked eye from a distance, you wouldn't particularly sort of notice a difference, but this is a freshwater bird that has bred in Northern Europe, and at the same time as the Carbo has increased in size and also its spread. And now we have migratory birds that come in over winter here in the UK every winter. And some of those birds have remained. So we have a mixed breeding sort of population throughout the UK. So you can see here spread. This is going back a few years. There's a few more dots on this map now, but these are the inland breeding colonies here. So I live, in the centre of England, Coventry. We have one near me at Combe Abbey, but you can see quite a lot of sort of large spread of these. And as well as the coastal sort of breeding populations as well, there's quite a lot of pressure then throughout the year on fisheries of cormorants coming into feed. So these are the two birds, these here. The real major difference is the angle on the gular pouch here, which is the sort of red, orange and yellow pouch at the base of the beak here when they're swallowing fish down. Okay, so when looking at sort of options that are available, there's many factors to consider on each fishery. So is the site designated for any reason? Are there other notable species that have protection on there? So that would be with Natural England. So whether it's a triple SI or an SPA, so obviously other species that you wouldn't want to disturb on there. Proximity to conurbation and public rights of way, particularly when talking about shooting, obviously a very emotive subject, and also the health and safety aspect to it. The species of the fish present and their habits, so what sort of species of fish you're looking to protect. Sort of techniques you'd use with a trout fishery would be different to if you're protecting shoalfish, such as roach and rudd. And also the habits and the characteristics of the birds that are using your water. So you can go, out into the countryside where birds are shot at under license, and they're very jumpy and very cautious of human presence. You can go into the centre of London, and you could be in a London Park lake, and the cormorants would be swimming right in front of you. So that would alter your sort of management of them. The size and the shape of the fishery. So, a small, I suppose, sort of farm lake that you could maybe rope off over the winter would be, that would be different to a huge, 2,000 acre trout fishery, where you'd have to look at different techniques of just managing cormorant numbers and trying to keep the rates of predation down. And then we've mentioned the other factors that obviously can affect fish stocks that we need to consider. So overstocking, poor water quality, invasive species such as signal crayfish. The human presence at site is key. Some of the techniques we'll talk about tonight are quite labour intensive. So whether that's that sort of regular scaring or say use of lasers, that so if you've got somebody that either lives on site or patrols on a regular basis, that could be key to keeping birds off. And then the existing non-lethal methods and how well they've been employed. So quite often we'll hear that we've tried scarecrows, we've tried bangers and all these, and none of them work, which, and there's an element of truth to that where birds will habituate. So it's about trying to get in other techniques that will reinforce the danger to birds on particular fisheries. So the first thing that I think we both always recommend to fisheries, if they've not done so already, would be to set up some sort of monitoring or a cormorant logbook. So this looks at a variety of things. So the numbers of birds visiting your fishery, their behaviour, what they're doing, feeding, loafing. You've got roosting birds. Even things like the flight paths and timings can help you with your management of those. When you've got to get down to scare and angles to set up sort of mannequins and where you're going to position hides. Photographs of any damaged fish can be brilliant. So if you're having a survey done or you're having a match, any fish when you're going through them, any damage, photograph that. That's key evidence should you need to go down the licensing process, or even for funding applications for refuge. And other things that can highlight sort of change over time, and match records can give an indication of a decline in fish stocks. So here's quite a simple one. This is a fishery down in Kennet Valley, but just monitoring that every day. This formed part of a license application, but it just gives the basic, what's been done. You can then go into a bit more detail. So this is what we sort of, I suppose, recommend to go alongside a license application, and that gives a bit more information about what's going on. Can seem a bit onerous, but actually getting into the swing of things, this can really help you, not only as evidence for a license application, but it will also tell you, if what you're doing, has any merit in it. So, what's working, what's not working, and also looking at the timing. So bird behaviour is going to change depending on what you're doing. So then you can, I suppose, alter your timings of what you're doing. And then some clubs now set up monitoring on their club websites. So if you're out on the bank and you've got anglers out there on the bank every day, they can sort of log in to your website, put the information in, and then you can pull that off and produce all the sort of Excel spreadsheets and whatever you want to produce using that information. And why it can be really important on monitoring bird numbers, particularly the roosting sites that we keep an eye on, is that should you get a sudden influx, and this is Dungeness, the photograph is from last year, but this is Dungeness when I think 4,000 or 5,000 birds turned up, and the surrounding fisheries down there in the southeast got absolutely walloped. So sort of keeping tabs on that can give you the heads up on, gearing up to protect your fish. This is one of those fisheries where birds were coming in. And looking at other roosting sites, so normally you pick them up in the day, you can see the trees that have been sort of bleached white with the guano. and a few birds there, and you can go back then and sort of use thermal imaging and count those birds up and understand what is actually going on in that area and the levels of damage, and we can help you with that if you want to work that out. I think what is clear, there's a handful of fisheries that can solve the problem with sort of one technique, but yeah, more often than not, there's no silver bullet, and it requires a variety of different techniques blended together and use those proactively throughout the year. So that could be, a scaring regime using a variety of non-lethals on smaller waters, exclusion techniques, so ropes and wires. Fish stock management, so whether that would be increasing size of stock fish or netting fish out and then having them grow on in different ponds then to get them past a cormorant sort of size meal, and also increasing refuge for fish. So certainly over a longer sort of time frame is looking to improve refuge for fish in times of predation and excluding cormorants from those areas. So looking at a scaring regime, and this is easy for me to say, it's a difficult job. What I would say is certainly set up targeted shooting to scare. So that's shooting to miss, obviously with landowner's consent and somebody with a shotgun certificate, with considerations on a designated site. Potentially inform your local police team and also residents if you've got people there, just to explain what you're doing to start off with, that you're keeping birds off the water to protect your fish. I think it's key to enter the fishery before the birds arrive. You want to be there. So if the birds are coming in at first light, half an hour before first light set up, to scare them as they're coming in. So you don't want them to feed and then scare them, because damage has been done. They'll either regurgitate the fish or they'll take off with them inside. And I'd say that this wants to be regular and sustainable. So normally sort of cormorant predation peaks during the winter. So have that set up so you can get down there on a regular basis throughout that whole winter and not sort of burn out, I suppose. If possible, if you've got a few people working on the fishery or within a club, work on a rota and work together. And then it's key to bring that through that log of action that I raised. So keep all of that information in there, because that's key information for you. Then alongside that, observing the bird behaviour, and then alter your timings then to reflect the changes in their behaviour. And then what we'll touch on a bit later is using hides and mannequins to condition birds to forage elsewhere. So more often than not, you can't be down on a fishery every single day shooting to scare. There's so many other things to be done. So using lifelike mannequins and hides to actually change their behaviour. So as they're flying in or around a fishery, you'll condition them to fear that's the shooter. So lethal intervention. So cormorants are protected like all wild birds under the Wildlife and Countryside Act in 1981, and also the Wild Birds Directive. But shooting to scare doesn't require any license from Natural England, obviously with considerations for designated sites, but also during the breeding bird season as well, when you can't shoot. But potentially on designated sites, you can shoot to scare and also shoot under licensed cormorants. Obviously just making sure that any non-targets are not being disturbed. And then there are licenses that can be issued by Natural England for the lethal control of cormorants to enhance scaring. And nationally at present, that's up to 3,000 birds annually. And annually, there is a licensing period from the 1st of September through to the 15th of April. That's there to protect breeding birds and leaving birds on nests. There are two extensions, two-week extensions there to protect the smolt run for sea trout and salmon on various rivers, so that can be put in place. And as I said, these are here to enhance scaring and non-lethal techniques as opposed to a reduction of population. The licenses, you can apply for an individual license, and this can actually cover 3 sites that are sort of close to each other. Or you can look to apply for or join an area-based license, and this could be a catchment or park catchment with sort of surrounding still waters, or if you're a club and you wanted to cover more than 4 waters, an area-based license might be something you want to look at. So on the shooting side of things, I think where I'm coming from, as opposed to the hunting side of things, would be to try and alter bird behaviour to I suppose, help the fishery manager in the long run. Cormorants have incredible vision and amazing accommodation, sight, so they can focus from a huge distance away. I suppose they've evolved to look for shoalfish from a great height and look for silverfish turning. So that their eyesight's extremely well adapted to understanding what's going on the bank. And whilst cormorants don't know what anglers are, they certainly know the difference between someone who's sitting there with a fishing rod and someone there with a shotgun. So you can use that to your advantage. So when it comes to scarecrows, and I love them, I've got hundreds of photos of all these wonderful different scarecrows that I've come across. This fella on the right here is having a cheeky can and a cigarette, and he looks like he's having a great time, but I don't think they're posing much of a threat to a cormorant, and birds will habituate to these really quickly. Days, maybe a few weeks, but before you know it, birds will be coming down and feeding in front of these. So mannequins want to look as sort of lifelike as possible with what you've got, and they want to be sort of proactively move around a fishery. But what is key, and even ones that look like they've got guns, the birds will still get used to them, is that element of shooting to scare, or if you've got a license, shooting to kill to enhance scaring from behind them, or using hides or a combination of mannequins and boats. Some sites you won't be able to shoot, and it's doing the best that you can to try and replicate those bangs. So that might be rope bangers or a starter pistol, or on some urban waters, even sort of two bits of wood that are slapped together can help. It's about doing what you can. So rather than go through it, and fail, I'd start, if possible, with shooting to scare, and see how you get on. So here's some of the variety of non-lethal sort of techniques that are on the market. I think what I would say is that the vast majority of these things that probably wouldn't scare cormorants off in the first instance, or they get used to them very quickly. I think from personal experience, gas guns can work very loud. You'll get complaints, but birds will sort of get used to them. I think starter pistols are a great tool, really good. You can carry them around, particularly sort of trusted bailiffs that don't have a shotgun certificate, and rope bangers can work fantastically as well. So looking at some exclusion tactics, this is a trout farm where it's not a problem to get those netted, where there's no obviously angling interest, and that's that should keep the majority of birds out. You'll still see herons trying to contort through those, and cormorants try to crash land on the bank, but that should do the job. String lines, this is in the Cotswold Water Park. Not a fishery, again, this is a growing on lake, but keeping the vast majority of birds off. What birds were doing then was landing on the adjacent water, hobbling out, and then swimming into this one. So that needed stock netting alongside that then to keep the birds out. This is a fishery down the Colne Valley. Just try to do what they can do to keep the birds off. They've got upstream and downstream 2 huge roosting sites, and basically birds using the river as a motorway going between the two. And it's very tricky when you've got hundreds of birds coming and going pretty much all day to try and keep them off. And I believe this has been updated now, so I should get down there to check that out. Yeah, this was one down in Essex, one I found out about, and you can actually see, if you look closely, you can see the lines there, and I actually thought that was just the computer screen, but actually it's a series of high wires that cover the whole fishery. So it might not be ideal or suited to many fisheries, but they were getting so many birds coming in that this is the action they've taken. They've put up scaffolding and high wires, which has completely stopped the cormorants from getting in. And the day we were there, we were seeing ducks and things sort of take off in between, but it's stopping the birds coming in. So fairly extreme, but it did the job. And it was one of those that fish weren't getting caught. And then within a few weeks of these going up, actually fish began to get caught again. And it was that the fish were under stress. They were in hiding during the day. So yeah, this worked here. Here's a small water down in Dorset, where they've combined a variety of options here to keep the birds off. It's a small part of the National Crucian Project, little tension crucians in there, perfect for cormorants to come in and eat up. So yeah, string lines here, particularly during the winter when the bird is raised, and a mannequin and some shooters on there, so it keeps the job. So stocking practice, I'll briefly mention that. I suppose it's common practice now for trout waters to stock sort of £2.5 plus. Cormorants will still have a go at those. They will still swallow those in some, but what you'll find is probably the rates of predation will drop. So you might get a higher incidence of damaged fish, but there's more fish left in the water. And then obviously you've got, I suppose, when it comes down to mixed sort of still waters, is looking at maybe carp fisheries and silver fisheries, and that, you know, are the cormorants coming in and doing a sort of cropping for those carp fisheries. But I'd say, yeah, looking at bringing fish on to the right sort of size, but cormorants will still have a go at them. But when it comes to stocking, I suppose timing's key. If you know that your cormorant numbers peak in November, probably don't stock then. Look to trickle stock or even, you know, vary the locations of stocking, so you haven't got all your fish sitting in one location acclimatizing, and then a group of cormorants could come down and get them. So longer term habitat improvements, you know, reed beds, planted of native tree species that offer all the sort of root structure into the margins. Sanctuary areas, so maybe leaving sort of certain areas out of bounds to angling, or take a few pegs out and try to create areas that fish can move to in times of predation. But I suppose left naturally, cormorants will still feed in these, and you know, I've witnessed this numerous occasions where cormorants will be diving through tunnels in the weed or under floating reed beds and around lilies. So what I'll do is I'll talk about sort of, I suppose, gearing those up with some man-made ideas. But if you want to, I suppose, sort of look into habitat improvements, if you're looking on small streams, the Wild Trout Trust, the Environment Agency, they have the Fisheries Improvement Fund, as well as the Angling Improvement Fund, which will hopefully have more money available in April, and also the Institute of Fisheries Management, which offer a variety of sort of training options, but particularly what I've been to a few of the weekend still water management courses. They're really popular. So yeah, this is at Coombe Abbey. This is a big, massive floating reed bed, and the cormorants, you still get 30 cormorants coming in here and swimming amongst the reeds and underneath it, and along the lilies here. So what I saw it, about 7-8 years ago down in Surrey somewhere, and it was using chestnut paling as sort of underwater fencing. The gaps between them, sort of 3 inches, perfect to let fish go through into these sort of sanctuary areas, but to stop cormorants coming in. So there's a small water down in Somerset, I think, and the cormorants would all drive up, work as a team, 3 or 4 birds, and push all the roach up to the end of this still water. So a bit of advice gave them, a bit of advice, which was to rope off the actual lake to try and break up their sort of landing strip and an area to take off as well. So potentially they could land in those gaps, but it's about their ability to take off, which I suppose stops them. And then right at the end would be to fence off the corner using that chestnut paling underwater. So should the birds get in, they push the fish into these areas, but the birds couldn't follow. This is the Surrey still water, so Shillingly. They put a variety of refuges in, floating ones, these sort of submerged structures to try and break up sort of cormorant feeding patterns and offer refuge. I thought worked quite well. So refuges, the 3 things I think you're looking for, certainly overhead cover. So you're offering shade. Fish will naturally, in terms of predation, move into those areas with overhead cover. And then any structure within that. So naturally they'd move into, I don't know, root sort of structures, but you could mimic that with sort of brushwood or sort of frayed rope and things like that, and anything to offer those structures to get into. But then key is to exclude cormorants from in there. So that could be stock netting, chestnut paling or wire to keep those birds from actually following them into the refuge areas. And I think that it's key to make the refuge areas significantly bigger than what you normally see on a fishery. The larger the better, I would say. And I really like the idea of sort of combining floating islands with these sort of fenced off areas and creating basically big sort of reefs where fish can get into and escape predation. The location of these can be key. So looking at areas of natural, winter migration. So, where do the roach move in the winter to a particular area? So, put your refuges there. or even areas where the birds push them to. And also key to keep these planted up. So you'll see a lot put in, and then a few years down the line, they just look like litter, or they look a bit like shopping trolleys sitting in the water. There's a couple of great videos on YouTube. Andy Eves from the Environment Agency, with some nice sort of cheaper options that clubs can do. It shows you the materials to get and how to build them. And they can be brilliant for getting in, particularly at sort of short notice. And then looking at the bottom photo is, yeah, don't just stick them out there and have them as an area for cormorants to sit on, because if anglers are sitting around the lake and they're not catching, and there's 40 cormorants sitting out there that have all fed, sitting there in front of anglers, it's going to cause some friction. So there's those birds sitting there. And yeah, see lots of homemade ideas, which I think are great. You know, recycling materials. These are refuges down small still water near the River Exe. Brilliant idea. Offers all that sanctuary we talked about, cover, areas to get into, stops the birds getting in there. So yeah, anything like that can work really well. These are the cheap and cheerful ones. You know, put these in. How well did they do? I'm not too sure. The still water we put them in was a monster. We ended up putting about 20, 25 of these in. But marked up with buoys here, so we knew how to go and retrieve them, and also to stop anglers and the pike anglers sort of bait boating their dead baits out to them, so they weren't going to pose a snag risk. Gull spikes are a nice little tool that can be used. So if you've got anything, I don't know, a floating pontoon out in your lake, or like we've got here, a trash screen on the River Trent. Excuse me, I need a drink. These can work well in just preventing birds from loafing there. So yeah, they might still come in and have a feed, but they're not going to come feed, digest the fish, feed again. So it just keeps them on the move. So here's a little still water in Reading where you can see these old posts. So a cormorant's taken up, sort of sitting on each of these posts, and then you've got one of these old sort of floating islands that has seen better days. So just something nice and simple, like take those posts out so the cormorants can't loaf there all day, and then maybe look at getting some matting on this and getting some plants growing into your fish refuge. So there's some work that can be done on roosts. Normally you'll find roosts on islands on still waters, and also breeding colonies, and sometimes alongside rivers, but normally out the way, quieter areas where the birds can sort of, I suppose, have a good look around and see, but they're undisturbed. And you can see these aren't the same island, but this one on the left is in Northampton. But birds were using the dead branches, and they could, see there was no threat, and they were just dropping into the lake and feeding. But over time, if it's a suitable site, bird numbers will increase. Potentially they'll start to breed there, and then you might get this sort of scenario. This is Walthamstow Reservoir on the right hand side, where that used to be one of the largest heronries in the UK. The herons were displaced by the cormorants, and then over time the trees have died, the soil structures changed. The island is, other than cormorants roosting there, doesn't sort of, I don't suppose, pose any sort of benefit to other wildlife. That's it in the winter. It's, quite remarkable. And you might find they'll also, this is down the River Exe. I mean, there's not much that can be done. There's no roost modification that you can do on here. So but potentially, something like lasers could work on this site. Lasers are a brilliant tool, but I'd say just in the right circumstance. And there are now some brilliant lasers that you can use. Sort of Portec, a really good one for about £300, and then the larger agri laser, and they're sort of used on airports to prevent bird strike. You can get smaller ones, but they can be hit and miss. So you can get some brilliant laser pens for cheaper options. But what I would do is recommend getting one from one of these trusted companies. So the laser's a brilliant tool used particularly on roosting birds. So as the light's fading and the birds are gathering to roost on say these large islands, the laser's used by flicking it across the bird's body, and they really don't like it, and they appear not to habituate to it. I've used them for a few years now. You've got to be very careful with them, so you need a safe backdrop. Misuse of lasers is you know, a serious offence, and I think people have been jailed using them inappropriately. But yeah, brilliant, using them in lower light to clear birds off. It's target selective and totally silent, so you can shine it across a water body onto an island, and you could, you know, leave all the overwintering ducks completely undisturbed, but you can just pick off those cormorants and keep them on the move. So it's something that requires repetition. So to start with, it might take 5 or 6 attempts to clear them off, and they'll come off the roost and fly around and come back, and you keep doing that, and eventually, over, you know, not too long a time, you'll condition those birds so as soon as they actually see you with the laser and it comes on, they'll disappear off to another site. And whilst that's moving them on, it's keeping them off the area where, you know, you've got fish in there that have been predated on. It's putting them onto another area where there potentially isn't an angling interest. So yeah, this is coombe. So I'd drive up, walk across the car park to the field, shine it on them, and they'd circle. And eventually, I'd move them off to another nature reserve where there's no angling on there. And it kept birds down from, you know, 120 plus down just to a handful. So, short video. So you can't see the laser on this. This is a thermal video. And what I'll be doing now is sort of shining the laser across to the birds. But what you'll see is this is dark now. But what you'll see is the birds disturbed and then all sort of come out of the trees, hopefully. And then this is another water, just trialing this on a large still water. And even counting the birds there, you know, you'd probably say there's 40. You see them start to come out of the trees and you realize how many there are actually there. And they're coming off the left. It pauses just to recalibrate, and there's, yeah, 70, I think there was 70, 80 birds coming up there. And done over time, this can reduce rates of predation on not only this still water, but those surrounding still waters, and worked in conjunction with other things, whether that's sort of shooting on neighbouring waters and other scare tactics, can have a good impact. This is used in the day. They can be used on still waters. They don't like that. That will keep them off. So, you know, waters where potentially range is an issue with shooting, lasers can be a great tool to help you. Okay, so yeah, I've probably talked enough. I'm about to lose my voice. So if you'd like to find out more, if you'd like some advice, you know, we offer advice over the telephone, email, or come and do a site visit and help you out on the bank. So yeah, here's our details. Richard there on the left and mine on the right hand side. So thanks for listening, and I think we'll see if we've got any questions come in. I shall let Richard answer those.